Every family has stories passed down through generations, stories of resilience, of survival, of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. But some family stories, especially non-Muslim, were never passed down, not because they weren't important, but because the families themselves disappeared. Picture your evening dinner table, your child asking for help with homework, your teenager sharing gossip from school. These moments feel eternal, don't they? As if they'll always be there. A letter preserved in monastery archives tells us about Milita, a Serbian mother in 1503. She's writing to her sister about an ordinary morning that became extraordinary for all the wrong reasons. Marco was feeding the chickens when they came. Just another dawn until it wasn't. He looked back at me once as they loaded him into their cart. His eyes, I see them every night. Militia's words echo across centuries and continents. From Egyptian villages to Spanish towns, Christian mothers wrote similar letters, not occasionally, but regularly, not during wartime, but during what was called peace. Today we're examining one of history's least discussed chapters, not because evidence doesn't exist, it fills archives across 3 continents, but because the communities who lived through these experiences left few descendants to preserve their memory. The historical record presents us with uncomfortable questions about how systematic oppression actually operates, how ordinary families become statistics, how protection becomes predation, how entire non-Muslim civilizations can disappear not through conquest, but through calculated erasure. What follows comes from their own testimonies, their own administrative records, their own voices, preserved in documents that survived when everything else was systematically destroyed. The Hakim family lived on Alexandria's Street of the Lampmakers, circa 680 CE. Yusuf, a Christian carpenter, shared morning tea with Ahmed the Muslim blacksmith and Samuel the Jewish merchant. Their children, Mariam, Omar and Ruth, played together, speaking Arabic, peppered with Coptic phrases. The Chronicle of John of Nikiu describes this Alexandria. Christians and Muslims attend each other's celebrations. The call to prayer mingles with church bells. Christians paid manageable jizya taxes. Father Severus wrote, "The new rulers permit our prayers and ask only fair tribute." Yusuf's final diary entry, March 698 CE. The future belongs to these children who see no walls between hearts. This was the world that existed for decades, Christians, Muslims and Jews, living as neighbors, their children playing together, their futures intertwined. But administrators in Damascus had been watching this peaceful coexistence, and they realized something that would change everything. Tolerant communities were harder to control than fearful ones, so they developed a system that would turn these neighbors into enemies, starting with the thing parents love most, their children. The village of Kruševo kept meticulous baptismal records, generation after generation of Serbian children born, blessed, raised in the faith of their fathers. Then, in 1455, the records show something that still haunts historians who study them. Every male child between 8 and 18 simply disappears from the records. Not dead, there are no burial entries, not moved away, their families remained. Just gone. What happened to the boys of Kruševo reveals a system that operated across the Balkans for over 4 centuries. The Devshirme, literally collection, transformed Christian children into the military elite of the empire that had conquered their families. Marko Petrović was 12 when they came to his village outside Belgrade in 1503. His mother, Milita, the same woman whose letter we read earlier, watched from her doorway as Ottoman officials examined her son like livestock at market. They checked his teeth, measured his height, tested his reflexes with simple commands. The selection criteria were precise, documented in Ottoman administrative manuals that survive today. Boys needed to be physically perfect, mentally sharp, and unmarried. They preferred rural children, believing city boys were too soft. Most importantly, they had to be Christian. The system specifically excluded Muslim children from this collection. "They are looking for the best of our sons," wrote Father Dimitri in his chronicle of that day. the strongest, the smartest, the most beautiful. They take our finest and leave us with broken hearts. The psychological warfare began immediately. Marko and 43 other boys were marched to collection centers, forbidden to speak Serbian, punished for mentioning their families. Ottoman records show the conversion process was methodical. New names, new language, new faith, new identity. Marko Petrović became Mehmet Bey. Over the following years, he would forget the sound of his mother's voice, the taste of Serbian bread, the prayers his grandmother taught him. This wasn't accidental, it was policy. The training institutions, called Semioğlan schools, operated with military precision. Boys learned Arabic and Turkish, studied Islamic law, practiced combat techniques. But the real transformation was psychological. They were taught that their former lives had been ignorance, their families had been infidels, their new existence was blessed salvation. Ibrahim Petsevi, an Ottoman historian, writing in the 16th century, described the process with bureaucratic pride. These boys, taken from Christian parents, become the most loyal servants of the Sultan. Having forgotten their origins, they serve with devotion that surpasses those born to the faith. The irony was deliberate. The empire's most feared military unit, the Janissaries, consisted entirely of stolen Christian children. The administrators who collected taxes from Christian villages were often former Christian boys. The judges who enforced Islamic law in Christian territories had themselves been baptized in Christian churches. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect was the homecoming. After 20 years of training, these men would return to their birth regions as Ottoman officials. Marko, now Mehmet Bey, found himself assigned to tax collection in Serbian villages just like his own. The Ottoman archives contain his administrative reports. In 1543, Mehmet Bey oversaw the collection of Christian boys from villages within 50 miles of where he had been born. His reports are clinical, professional, efficient. There's no hint that he recognized the landscape of his childhood or understood that he was perpetuating the system that had destroyed his own family. One entry, dated April 15, 1543, reads, "Collected 67 suitable boys from 12 villages. Quality excellent. Recommend increased quotas for next collection." Among those 67 boys was likely a 12-year-old who reminded villagers of young Marko Petrović before he became Mehmet Bey. The demographic impact was catastrophic. The village of Gudje Podinje provides a documented case study. In 1463, Ottoman collectors took every single boy between 8 and 18, every single one. Without young men, fields went unplowed. Without sons to inherit, family lines ended. Archaeological evidence shows the village was abandoned within 25 years. This pattern repeated across the Balkans. Serbian, Bulgarian, Albanian, and Greek communities faced systematic bleeding of their youth. The Ottoman population registers, kept with bureaucratic precision, show the mathematical effect. Christian populations declined while Muslim populations grew, not through natural increase, but through forced conversion of captured children. The parents' responses reveal the depth of their desperation. Some Christian families deliberately maimed their sons, cutting off fingers, blinding eyes, breaking bones, to make them unsuitable for collection. Others fled to remote mountains, living as outlaws rather than submit their children to the system. One Serbian folk song from this period, preserved in oral tradition, captures the impossible choice. "Better a son with no eyes than no son at all. Better a child who limps than a child who serves our enemies. Better to break his bones than to break our hearts forever." Yet even these desperate measures often failed. Ottoman collectors learned to anticipate resistance. They would arrive at villages unexpectedly, surround communities before families could hide their children, and take boys regardless of minor physical defects. The financial incentives drove the system's efficiency. Provincial governors received bonuses based on the number of boys collected. Village officials who cooperated were rewarded. Those who resisted faced severe punishment. The entire administrative structure was designed to maximize child extraction. But the most chilling aspect was how the system perpetuated itself. former Christian boys became the most zealous collectors of the next generation. Having been psychologically reconstructed to serve the empire, they applied their intimate knowledge of Christian communities to improve collection efficiency. Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, born Bajika Sokolović in a Serbian village, rose to become Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire. He ordered military campaigns against his own homeland, commanded armies that would raid Serbian villages, and oversaw the very devshirme system that had taken him as a child. In a gesture that some historians interpret as remembrance of his origins, Sokolu built a bridge in his hometown of Visegrad, the famous bridge on the Drina. But the bridge's true purpose was strategic. It allowed Ottoman armies to cross the river more easily, facilitating future military campaigns and tax collection in Serbian lands. Even his apparent gift to his birthplace served the empire that had erased his original identity. The children of Kruševo never returned home. Marko Petrovic's mother Milica died waiting for a son who no longer remembered her name. The boys who had played in Serbian streams became men who drew taxes from Serbian villages. The hands that had once been blessed by Christian priests now collected Christian children for the same fate they had suffered. The devshirme represented something unprecedented in human history, a system that turned a people's own children into instruments of their destruction. It was efficient, profitable, and self-perpetuating. But it was only the beginning. Because while the Ottoman Empire perfected the art of stealing boys, other Islamic powers were developing an even more brutal industry focused on different victims. What they did to adult men makes the devshirme seem almost merciful by comparison. Almost, because when you're dealing with a practice that had a 90% mortality rate, mercy becomes a meaningless concept. The medical facilities of medieval Cairo were among the most advanced in the world. Islamic physicians had developed surgical techniques that European doctors wouldn't master for centuries. They understood anatomy, sterilization, pain management. Their hospitals treated patients with care that seemed miraculous to foreign visitors, which makes what happened in certain specialized facilities even more difficult to comprehend. Because the high mortality rates weren't due to medical ignorance. They were the result of deliberate choices about human value. Hassan ibn Yusuf was 14 when raiders took him from his village outside Aleppo in 847 CE. The journey to Cairo's processing centers claimed 30% of the boys in his caravan, those too weak to survive the march across the desert in chains. Hassan survived because he was strong, healthy, exactly what the buyers wanted. The Aswan Operations Center, located at the first cataract of the Nile, processed between 3,000 and 5,000 boys annually. The facility wasn't hidden, it operated openly, with official permits, tax records, and administrative oversight. The Coptic Christians who ran the operations maintained detailed business ledgers that have survived in Egyptian archives. These records read like inventory management for any medieval industry, except the inventory was human lives. Received 247 Nubian boys, ages 8 to 16. Good health, reads one entry from 923 CE. Procedure completed on 234. Recovery rate, 31 survivors. Net profit after expenses, 892 dinars. 31 survivors from 234 procedures. The mathematics of horror calculated with bureaucratic precision. Hassan's experience, recorded 40 years later when he had risen to become a palace administrator, provides the only first-hand account we have of surviving the process. Writing in his memoir, he describes watching boys die in the recovery rooms where he spent 3 months healing. They called it purification, Hassan wrote. But there was nothing pure about watching 30 boys die in the beds around me. Their mothers had kissed them goodbye, believing they would live as servants in great houses. Instead, they died, calling names their jailers couldn't understand. The economic incentives drove the industry's brutal efficiency. An intact slave boy sold for 50 dinars. The same boy, if he survived the procedure, commanded 150 to 200 dinars. Despite the 90% mortality rate, the profit margins made it worthwhile. The Damascene merchant Ibn Hawqal's ledger from 1067 CE provides a chilling business calculation. Purchased 100 Ethiopian boys at 45 dinars each. Transportation costs 500 dinars. Procedure costs 200 dinars. Lost 89 to death. Sold 11 survivors at average 175 dinars each. Net profit 375 dinars. He calculated profit margins on dead children like spoiled inventory. The geographic distribution of these centers reveals the industry's scope. Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, Basra, Cordoba, wherever Islamic empires expanded, specialized facilities followed. It was as essential to the imperial economy as taxation or trade routes. The religious justifications required elaborate legal gymnastics. Islamic law technically forbade the procedure. The solution was elegant in its hypocrisy: have Christians and Jews perform the operations, then convert the survivors to Islam afterward. The legal scholars who crafted these interpretations wrote treatises explaining why this was technically permissible under religious law. Reading these judicial opinions today is like watching corporate lawyers justify environmental destruction, except the toxic waste was human lives. The demand was insatiable. Harems needed supervisors who posed no reproductive threat. Palaces required administrators who couldn't establish competing dynasties. Mosques employed eunuchs as guards and caretakers. The market created its own supply through systematic brutality. Ahmed ibn Tulun's administrative records from 9th century Egypt detail the procurement process with clinical detachment. Provincial governors received quotas for boys to be collected. Village leaders who cooperated received rewards. Those who resisted faced punishment. The entire system was designed to maximize supply while minimizing administrative complications. But the most disturbing aspect was how medical knowledge was deliberately ignored to maintain profit margins. Byzantine and Persian physicians had developed techniques with 60 to 70% survival rates. The crude methods used in Islamic centers could have been improved with minimal expense. They chose not to improve them. Dead boys made living eunuchs more valuable. It was supply and demand economics applied to human mutilation. Jan, captured at age 12 from a village in Bohemia, survived both the 1,000-mile march to Cairo and the procedure itself. His memoir, written decades later from his position as a palace official, describes the deliberate cruelty of the system. The physicians knew how to save us. I saw them treat their own children with techniques they never used on us. Our high death rate wasn't medical necessity, it was business strategy. Scarcity increased value. The psychological destruction often proved more complete than the physical trauma. Boys who survived learned that their bodies belonged to their masters, their futures were determined by others' desires, their very masculinity had been surgically removed to serve imperial convenience. Hassan's memoir describes the moment he understood his new reality. I realized I would never father children, never have a family, never leave anything of myself in this world except service to those who had destroyed me. They hadn't just cut my body, they had severed my connection to the future. The facility's locations weren't accidental. Aswan sat at the border between Islamic Egypt and Nubian kingdoms, making it convenient for processing boys acquired through tribute or raids. The center could operate efficiently while maintaining plausible distance from major population centers where the procedures might disturb local sensibilities. European travelers who witnessed these operations left horrified accounts. The Venetian merchant Marco Bembo wrote in 1483, "I have seen battles and pestilence, but nothing prepared me for the deliberate mutilation of children conducted with such clinical efficiency. These are not the acts of barbarians, they are the calculated policies of administrators." The boys who died were buried in mass graves outside the processing centers. Archaeological excavations in the 20th century revealed burial sites containing hundreds of skeletons, all showing evidence of the procedure, all aged between 8 and 16 years old. Those who survived faced a different kind of death, the erasure of their potential for natural human relationships, family, legacy. They lived as shadows of what they might have been, their truncated lives serving masters who viewed their mutilation as a business expense. The system operated for over a millennium, processing an estimated 5 to 8 million boys. At a 90% mortality rate, we're looking at approximately 4.5 to 7.2 million deaths, a Holocaust-level death toll spread across centuries and continents. Hassan lived to be 73, rising to high administrative rank within the palace bureaucracy. But his final diary entry, discovered in Cairo's archives, reveals the cost of survival. "I have served faithfully for 50 years, accumulated wealth and influence, earned the Sultan's trust. Yet every night I dream of the village boy I was before they cut away my future. Success means nothing when you remember what you were meant to be." So now you understand the castration industry, how they turned millions of boys into eunuchs, killing 9 out of 10 in the process. How they made this industrial-scale mutilation profitable through simple economics. Dead boys made living eunuchs more valuable. But here's what's going to shock you. This entire system, the capture, the transportation, the deadly procedures, the lifetime of servitude, this was considered the merciful option. Because what they did to women and girls was far worse. And the numbers will make you sick. Does this make you see history differently? If so, leave your thoughts below. We want to hear you. So now you understand how they turned boys into eunuchs, killing 9 out of 10 in the process. But here's what's going to shock you. This was considered the merciful option because what they did to women and girls was designed not just to destroy individuals, but to erase entire bloodlines. And the scale will make you sick. Layla knew what was coming. Every woman in her Circassian village knew. When raiders appeared on the horizon, mothers had minutes to make impossible choices. Some tried to hide their daughters in root cellars or mountain caves. Others did something that still breaks historians' hearts to read about. They scarred their own children's faces. Layla took a kitchen knife and carefully cut her 9-year-old daughter's cheek. Not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to scar. Because Layla understood the market economics of human trafficking. Beautiful children brought higher prices, and she'd rather her daughter live scarred than die beautiful. It didn't work. The raiders took her anyway. "Scars heal," they told Layla. "Even damaged goods have value." This wasn't random violence during conquest. This was systematic procurement for an industry that had been operating for centuries. The Crimean port of Kaffa processed 20,000 women annually through a single harbour. That's 55 women every day, bought and sold like grain or silk. The age documentation preserved in Ottoman commercial records reads like evidence from a modern trafficking investigation. Primary age ranged 12 to 25, peak market value 14 to 16, virginity verified and guaranteed, return policies 7 days for quality disputes. They had customer service policies for sexual slavery. The sorting process at Kaffa was mechanically cruel. Women were separated by age, ethnicity, and physical attributes. Circassian women commanded the highest prices. Their fair skin and alleged beauty had turned an entire ethnic group into a target for systematic enslavement. The price lists from Damascus markets in 1298 c. survive in commercial archives. Premium Circassian girl, ages 13 to 15, 200 dinars. Slavic woman, proven fertile, 150 dinars. African girl, any age, 80 dinars. Human beings catalogued and priced like livestock, with market fluctuations based on supply and demand. But these weren't just individual tragedies. This was demographic warfare designed to prevent certain populations from reproducing naturally. Take the women, prevent the next generation, watch entire ethnic groups slowly disappear. Fatima bint Ahmad wrote the only surviving first-hand account from inside the system. Captured at age 15 from her village in Anatolia, she lived 30 years within the Topkapi Palace harem before gaining enough trust to document her experience. Her memoir, hidden in palace walls and discovered during 20th century renovations, describes a world that defies modern comprehension. We were inventory managed by accountants who tracked our monthly cycles, our pregnancies, our suitability for different purposes. Those who pleased the Sultan might bear children who could inherit status. Those who didn't disappeared into service roles or died from neglect. The Topkapi Palace, at its peak, contained over 2,000 women. Not wives, slaves. The procurement invoices have survived in Ottoman archives, received 24 Georgian girls, ages 13 to 17, verified condition, suitable for imperial service. Fatima describes the hierarchy of suffering within the system. New girls cried constantly for mothers they'd never see again. Older women taught them silence. Crying drew attention, and attention often meant death. We learned to mourn quietly, to hope silently, to exist without disturbing those who owned us. The psychological destruction was as systematic as the physical abuse. Women were given new names, forbidden to speak their native languages, punished for mentioning their families. The goal wasn't just sexual slavery, it was complete erasure of previous identity. But perhaps most disturbing was how the system made victims complicit in their own oppression. Senior women within harems often became recruiters, helping select new girls from arriving caravans. Fatima writes, "I became what I once feared, a woman who examined frightened children to determine their value to our captors. Survival required participating in others' destruction." The transportation networks operated with commercial efficiency. Safe houses along trade routes, corrupt officials providing documentation. Medical inspections to verify product quality. The entire infrastructure resembled modern trafficking operations, except it was legal, regulated, and socially accepted. European diplomatic records from the period provide outside perspectives on this normalized horror. The Venetian ambassador Girolamo Priuli wrote in 1499, "The Sultan's palace contains more enslaved women than Venice contains free citizens." What disturbs me most isn't the number, but how ordinary this seems to palace officials. They discuss human purchases with the same casualness we reserve for discussing wine. The reproductive control was calculated to prevent demographic recovery. Women who became pregnant faced uncertain fates. Children might be acknowledged and elevated or killed to prevent inheritance complications. Unwanted pregnancies often ended in forced procedures that frequently killed both mother and child. The succession anxieties of rulers made pregnancy dangerous for enslaved women. A son might threaten legitimate heirs. A daughter might be married off for political advantage. Either way, the woman's role was to serve power structures that viewed her reproduction as state business. Escape attempts were punished with tortures designed to terrorize other women into submission. Fatima's memoir describes punishments so severe they cannot be detailed here. They made examples of the brave ones, ensuring the rest of us learned that death was preferable to capture, but capture was preferable to attempted escape. The economic records show the industry's staggering scope. Conservative estimates suggest 10 to 15 million women were enslaved specifically for sexual purposes across Islamic empires over 14 centuries. Unlike Atlantic slavery, which left descendants who preserve memory and demand justice, this system was designed to leave no witnesses. The children born to enslaved women faced terrible fates. Boys might be acknowledged if their fathers chose recognition. Girls often became slaves like their mothers. Unwanted children disappeared into systems that didn't document their disposal. Fatima survived 30 years in captivity before dying of an illness that palace physicians refused to treat. Her usefulness had expired. Her final entry reads, "I was Fatima bint Ahmad of Trebizond. I had parents who loved me, a name they gave me, dreams they nurtured. I die as palace slave, 247, remembered by no one, mourned by no one, survived by no one." Her memoir concludes, "If someone finds these words, know that we existed. We had names before they gave us numbers. We had families before they made us property. We were human before they made us inventory." So that's the sexual slavery machine. Millions of women reduced to anonymous entries in commercial ledgers, their children killed or enslaved, their identities erased so completely that most left no trace they ever existed. But individual destruction, however massive, wasn't enough for this system, because people can rebuild families, communities can recover from losses, cultures can survive even terrible persecution. These administrators understood that. So they developed something more permanent, a systematic method for destroying not just people, but the very memory that cultures need to survive. They were about to erase entire civilizations so thoroughly that languages spoken for millennia would die with their last speakers. So that's how they destroyed individual women, millions of them reduced to inventory in commercial ledgers. But destroying people, however systematically, still left traces. Families could rebuild, communities could recover, languages could survive in hidden corners. The administrators understood this limitation, so they developed something more permanent, a method for erasing entire civilizations so completely that future generations wouldn't even know they had existed. Father Mikhail was the last man in his Egyptian village who could read Coptic script, the language that had evolved directly from ancient Egyptian, the tongue of the pyramids, the words that had been spoken continuously for over 3,000 years, was dying, and he knew it. Every night by candlelight, Father Mikhail copied ancient texts into Arabic letters, not translating, preserving, trying to save the sounds of prayers his grandmother had whispered, the stories that connected his people to pharaohs and saints alike. His arthritis made writing agony, but he pushed through. Page after page of careful script, hidden beneath loose floorboards because possessing old language books was becoming dangerous under new cultural policies. The Chronicle of the Coptic Patriarchate records what happened next. Father Mikhail was found in the church basement, surrounded by piles of ash. Someone had burned his life's work while he watched, then left him to die with the smoke still rising from 3,000 years of Egyptian words. The last native speaker of Coptic Egyptian died surrounded by the ashes of Coptic literature. This wasn't accidental, it was systematic cultural annihilation with bureaucratic precision. The language policies followed predictable patterns. First, Arabic became required for government service. Coptic speakers couldn't function in administration without Arabic. Then commerce, can't trade without the official language. Then public spaces, speaking Coptic in markets became suspicious, then dangerous, then illegal. Within 3 generations, the language that had recorded the construction of the pyramids existed only in the memories of elderly priests. When they died, 5 millennia of continuous linguistic tradition died with them. The Zoroastrian extinction follows an even more systematic pattern. For over 1,000 years, sacred fires had burned continuously in Persian temples. Some flames had been tended by 50 generations of priests, burning since before Alexander the Great conquered Persia. Jamshid was 18 when the new governors arrived with orders to extinguish all fire temples. Not convert them, extinguish them. The sacred fires that connected Zoroastrians to their god, their ancestors, their identity, were to be eliminated entirely. The night before the extinguishing, Jamshid attempted something both beautiful and heartbreaking. He took a burning stick from the sacred fire and buried it in a clay pot in his garden, with enough fuel to last a few days. His plan was to restart the eternal flame when the persecutions ended. Jamshid was executed the next morning for theft of state property. The fire went out while he hung from a tree outside his own temple. 800 years of continuous sacred flame died with the teenager who had tried to preserve it. The destruction of fire temples wasn't random conquest damage, it was policy. Administrative records from the Arab conquest of Persia show deliberate targeting of religious infrastructure. Military commanders received specific instructions to locate and destroy all Zoroastrian temples, ensuring no centers of resistance could emerge around religious identity. Within 2 centuries, Zoroastrianism went from Persia's dominant religion to a scattered refugee minority fleeing to India. Today there are fewer Zoroastrians worldwide than residents of a small city. a faith that had shaped Persian civilization for over a millennium, reduced to an endangered minority. But even this pales compared to what happened at Nalanda University in 1193 CE. Picture the Oxford of the ancient world, the greatest center of learning in human history. 9 million books, manuscripts from across Asia, scholars who had preserved knowledge for 8 centuries. The destruction took 6 months, not because the buildings were large, but because the books were numerous. Monks were burned alive with the manuscripts they tried to save. The archaeological evidence shows layers of ash feet deep, mixed with human remains, scholars who died protecting knowledge. The Buddhist populations of Central Asia faced complete erasure. Afghanistan had been a Buddhist kingdom for 1,000 years. By 1200 CE, Buddhist population went from millions to zero, not reduced, eliminated. The missing populations tell a story no one wants to calculate. Entire regions depopulated, gender ratios skewed for centuries. Cultural groups vanished, languages extinct. But connecting these demographic facts to Islamic expansion policies, that's where academic careers end. The systematic nature becomes clear when you examine the pattern. First, religious infrastructure was destroyed or converted. Churches became mosques, temples became administrative buildings, fire altars were extinguished, the physical spaces where communities gathered and preserved their traditions were eliminated. Second, religious leadership was targeted. Priests executed, scholars killed, anyone who could read the old texts or perform traditional ceremonies was removed. Cut off the head and the body dies. Third, the languages themselves were attacked. Native tongues banned in public, restricted in commerce, eventually forbidden entirely. When children can't learn their grandparents' language, cultural transmission breaks. The Coptic patriarch Benjamin VII wrote in his final letter, circa 1145, CE, "We are the last generation to speak the tongue of our fathers. Our children speak Arabic dreams, think Arabic thoughts, pray Arabic prayers. When we die, Egypt dies with us." His prediction proved accurate. The Egypt that had built pyramids, survived Persian conquest, endured Roman rule, and embraced early Christianity was erased so completely that modern Egyptians know more about ancient Rome than about Coptic Egypt. The speed of this erasure defies natural cultural evolution. Languages that had survived for millennia vanished within decades. Religions practiced for centuries disappeared within generations. Entire intellectual traditions, philosophy, poetry, science, art, were lost as if they had never existed. The survivors who fled carried fragments of their destroyed cultures to distant lands. Zoroastrians became the Parsi community in India. Coptic Christians retreated to monasteries in the desert. Buddhist scholars escaped to Tibet and East Asia, but these refugees represented the tiniest fraction of what had been lost. So that's how they erased entire civilizations, not through conquest, but through systematic cultural annihilation. Languages, religions, traditions that had existed for millennia, gone. But here's what should terrify you most. They didn't just destroy these cultures, they made sure we'd never learn about the destruction, because the greatest genocide isn't just killing people, it's making sure no one remembers they ever lived. So now you understand how they erased entire civilizations and buried the evidence. But here's what should terrify you: what humanity lost forever. When Father Mikhail died with burning Coptic texts, 3,000 years of Egyptian knowledge disappeared. When Jamshid's sacred fire was extinguished, Persian innovations died with it. When Nalanda University burned, 8 centuries of Asian scholarship turned to ash. The demographic cost: 112 million Africans eliminated over 14 centuries. Not just those enslaved, but potential innovators whose contributions were destroyed before they could be made. These victims left no descendants to demand justice, no communities to preserve memory. The perfect crime: destroy witnesses so completely that no one remains to testify. Understanding this history gives us systems to recognize and prevent. Their stories deserve remembrance because human dignity demands recognition. This hits the key points. summarizes what was learned, emphasizes the permanent loss to humanity, gives the scale, explains why it was hidden, and ends with the lesson about recognizing oppressive systems. If this story moved you, don't let it become another secret lost to time. Share these voices like the video and comment your opinion, explore them further, and give memory to those who were denied it. In remembering, we honor not only the victims but our own humanity.